welcome Pete Furey, the Executive Director of the New Jersey Farm Bureau. Pete, you've been working to support agriculture in the state for a long time. You recently called the current situation for farmers critical. Please tell us about the great work of the New Jersey Farm Bureau and what we as residents and leaders can do to help.
Thank you, Valerie. Can you all hear me? Hear me well? Okay, good.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Good. It's the end of a long day. My voice gets a little raspy, so bear with me. Yeah, it's good to be with you all. And first off, I just wanted to establish the connection between what we do at the Farm Bureau and what you all do with the sustainability movement. I would argue that the type of farming that we do in New Jersey, it's a commercial business that's producing $1.2 billion of commodities at the farm gate value a year, 1.2 billion. And that's a pretty big industry, and it's practiced on 700,000 acres of New Jersey land, and there's 5 million plus acres. So if you think of the woodlands that surround the farms and pasture lands and things that are not actively farmed, agriculture accounts for about half of the remaining open space in New Jersey. So we have a lot at stake to keep the industry thriving from a sustainability standpoint. But, you know, the farmers think of sustainability first as being able to make a living, right? And the kind of farming that we do is already sustainable from an environmental standpoint. I mean, I can tell you things about no-till and cover crops that are common practices in New Jersey that would be considered progressive even in Western Europe. The farmers here practice integrated pest management. All right, integrated pest management means we don't use chemicals unless we have proof that the insects are in the field or the orchard first. And then we carefully apply those chemicals to control the quality and the yield of the crop. So no-till and the IPM. And then thirdly, every commercial farmer that I know, and it's safe to say, they're guided by the practices of university professors. I don't think everybody realizes that your farmers, when they produce food, the advice and recommendations about how to farm and use inputs and use the land is guided by university professors. And they come from Rutgers University and in an institution called the Cooperative Extension Service. And this is a system called the Land Grant University System that goes back all the way to Abraham Lincoln, who signed the first bill to set up these land grant universities in all of the 50 states. So Rutgers is the land grant university. So all the New Jersey farmers are getting scientifically based, conservation-oriented recommendations from university professors. So things like IPM and cover crop, that's second nature to us. Plus we get 45 inches of rain a year in New Jersey and East Coast. And we have a hard freeze, hopefully, in the wintertime, so we don't have to fumigate the soil to get rid of the pests that can ravage crops like they do in California. So here we have environmental advantages and cultural practices that make us sustainable. But go back to the point of it, the farmer's perspective. When they hear you guys talk about sustainable, they scoff. Good-naturedly, but they scoff and say, sustainable, huh? I got to be able to make a living if I'm even going to be out here farming and growing the food for the population. So it's an easy deal to make because the practices that we employ are the ones that I think all of you would endorse and applaud. So what are the viability problems? What are those economic issues? I think you saw my name in the paper and we've been speaking out about it because in 2022, you know, there's a chronic income problem for farmers every year. It's a very difficult business. It's akin to jumping on a very fast-moving merry-go-round. To try to get into farming is nearly impossible. Right? There's so much capital costs, there's so much skill, there's so much marketing expertise. There's so many requirements, and there's so much competition. There's a lot of people in this industry before you. So to get involved in agriculture is a very difficult process year to year. But in 2022, as David Watts alluded to, last fall when the farmers were prepaying for their fertilizer, they were seeing sticker shock about 100% increase in their fertilizer costs. And it's like, what in the world is going on? Well, this was the beginning of a compounding series of other increased costs for fuel like gasoline and diesel, and then also other inputs like seed and packaging and plastics and chemicals and so forth. And all of a sudden, we had this skyrocketing cost of inputs for the 2022 season. Now, ordinarily, that would shake your confidence about being able to make a living. But the farmers are pretty resilient. They'll still strap everything on and go charging into the new year, as we did during the pandemic. You just dial back 2020 and 2021. It was pretty scary. They shut the economy down because people were getting sick just by walking outside. But the government was wise and said, farmers, we want you to keep farming. But still, it was very challenging. And you saw people leave the supermarkets in droves. And where did they go? They went to farmers markets to buy their fresh food. Well, it was a good thing the farmers were farming, so they had the food to provide them when they came out. So we were looking at 2022 almost as like a rerun of this crisis of the pandemic. But this one's really tough because you can't lose money week to week and stay in business very long. I've heard stories about farmers have already borrowed or used all of the operating loan money that they got for this whole season, and they're dipping in the savings. And it's hard to make a payroll when the workers are demanding wages because they know that there's scarcity and they know the critical role. And farmers pay what they have to pay. You heard the story about I can't afford a guy because I wouldn't be able to pay myself. Well, enlarge that. If you have 35 employees and you're trying to grow 100 acres of mixed vegetables in Vineland, it's a scary proposition. So we went into the media to not look for a handout, but just to let the public know that there's something very serious going on. And the public of New Jersey really counts on agriculture for local fresh food and also the open spaces that all the farms provide. All commodities of agriculture and beyond fruits and vegetables. But in the summertime, the fruits and vegetables are the sector that we talk most about. So I could give you some other insights as to the reality of farmers having off-farm income to make ends meet, that they don't own all the land that they farm because they can't afford it. They sometimes sell off, or they have to put money together to buy equipment and so forth. So they're very innovative and very resilient, but we're worried about this year. I've heard more anecdotal stories about people shrinking their business or simply stepping out of the business at the end of this year if the deficit income is going to persist. And we've been doing some checking, and until this heat wave, as bad as it was for the input costs, there was some life in the prices of some of the commodities. Bell peppers, for example. We produce about $224 million of vegetables, just vegetables in New Jersey. And bell peppers is the largest item, it's $55 million item. Well, suddenly the market for bell peppers about 3 weeks ago got very hot. They were getting paid very nice price for bell pepper. It began to just even things out of this tough spring that we had. And then 2 weeks later, boom, 100-degree heat. Now, what happens with this high heat is unseen by a lot of people. But the flowers that are grown on the tomato plant, once established, bell peppers and eggplant, they just drop off. It's almost like a spring freeze for peaches, where they freeze and die and you don't have fruit set. Well, you already have the plant set. You may have some initial picking, but that heat will kill the flower. So for the rest of July and into August, they're not going to have fruit set for all those plants. Now that's a kick in the teeth after what we've been going through. And we just started to see a little light in the tunnel for the prices of vegetables. So I don't know what's going to happen. And I don't need to tell you about the cost of irrigation just to keep the crops surviving in the heat, in the absence of rain. You have diesel pumps, and those pumps, that's very expensive. And if we had good regular rain, that would all be money kept in the pockets of the farmer. They have no choice but to dig deeper and pay for those irrigation costs. I could go on and on. It's a very challenging situation. So, to kind of summarize this and to look forward, what can be done? What can advocates of open space and progressive farm practices that are common sense and already adopted in New Jersey agriculture, what can you all do to help us? Well, we have some other issues that affect viability more than just the cost of the inputs. Viability is harmed when you have a tremendous deer population that come into the fields and ravage the crops. A deer takes a bite out of a pumpkin, you can't sell that pumpkin. Same thing with other fruits or ground crops. And to say this, that the deer feast on soybeans to get protein is kind of a joke. It's a sad joke, but it's so true. Well, what you all could do, number one, is be advocates for sound game code, wildlife management. We've got to get that herd size to a sustainable, how about that word, level. I think there's the deer herd size, based on drone studies that we financed, is over 300,000 deer at an average density of 100 deer per square mile. Well, Mother Nature, if we didn't have interference, the level should be about 15 or 20 deer per square mile. In other words, we have a 5 or 6 factor overpopulation of deer. And we just heard today at a meeting that the bear population in Northwest Jersey is growing because of a lack of hunting and the bear coming in and attacking livestock. They do bear rolls in cornfields and so forth and so on. Geese are another problem. And so wildlife, we need a strong wildlife management program, and we would appreciate some support in the advocacy of the same. Second thing you could do is be champions for buy local, locally grown. Now, guess what? When the farmers at the wholesale level sell their produce and it ends up in the chain stores, do they get credit for having grown the produce high quality, nutritious, around the corner from where the population is? Or does it get mixed in with produce that's coming in from Ohio and far away, and everything is labeled local? So we had some legislation passed that says if you're going to sell it as local, it better be from New Jersey, or you would be in violation. So we would love all of you to go into the supermarkets and challenge the produce manager. Hey, it's July and August. Where's your Jersey fresh produce? What are you talking about Mexico? What are you talking about Costa Rica? Why? Because the merchants, the people in the middle, make more money when they buy cheap and they could sell at a premium. So the local farmers don't enjoy that premium price that they need to pay for all these costs that I've already talked about. Number 3, climate, carbon trading, carbon markets. There's a lot of potential that the farms can be carbon sequestration sinks, and they can grow they can conduct climate-friendly practices, and they can turn around and be paid for carbon credits by corporations whose manufacturing facilities are creating greenhouse gas emissions. That's called a carbon trade. So the system would be that the corporations are assessed this responsibility to purchase carbon credits, and those credits are created by farmers on the ground that are doing climate smart practices. That's an income generation for the farm, and they take advantage of being out in the field. It's an easy thing to do, it just has to be organized. And I'm not talking about taxpayer money. This could all be done within contracts between private sector and private sector. Fourth thing you could do is something we call watershed rights. When a developer tries to build in a downtown area, in a environmentally restricted area, they sometimes are penalized to go secure density rights elsewhere in the watershed, in the upper reaches of the same watershed, that then gets redeveloped into a more complex and more environmentally resourceful watershed, thinking of landscape improvements. That's done through grants to the landowners, and farmers have lots, in many places, have lots of acreage that are already in watershed area, and they can come in and be redeveloped, and the farmer can get paid for it. It's another example of income. And then lastly has to do with property rights. Now, the thing about farming is, think of a poker player when they have a big pile of chits, right? And they think they have a winning hand, and they push everything into the middle, and they bet. And the bet is, in agriculture, is that you're going to be able to sustain the weather and the temperatures in the summer and have good yields, and then get a market price that gives you total revenue that lets you get all the costs of the inputs back. That's the risk, right? So with that figurative analogy, with all that risk, you need to have your assets, your property assets, protected with a strong property rights ethic that is immunized from whimsical intervention of state and local regulation. And we have a program in agriculture called the Right to Farm. Right to Farm means that the farmer should be able to practice sound agricultural practices without nuisance interference. And that's kind of a property rights kind of thing. Other examples of property rights is don't come in and rezone my property into very low density and take away my values in the process of making me a permanent farm without paying me for it. That's sort of a dramatic example. Fortunately, we don't have too many of those issues anymore. But property rights is something that the average citizen could say, the farmer with taking all this risk really needs to have some protection. So those are a couple things that could be done. And I've tried to lay out some of the complexities and the high risk that is associated with feeding the population. And we've done a good job of it, right? 1.2 billion, 250 million of vegetables. And I'm not even telling you about some other commodity areas like peaches and blueberries and tomatoes. We produce $47 million of it. All those things are very intensively farmed, and it takes a lot of risk capital, a lot of hard work, and a lot of management. And farmers are skilled. They're game to do it. But this year, 2022, we've really got ourselves in a pickle, and we need and appreciate everybody's support. Thank you very much.